These 5 assumptions of Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium then can become 5 agents of evolutionary change whenever they're violated. So mutation, gene flow or gene transfer, non-random mating, genetic drift in small populations, and natural selection are all agents of evolutionary change. So here we'll talk about them in more detail. First up, number 1, we got mutation, which is a permanent change in a cell's DNA from one allele to another allele. In general, rates are pretty darn low, just about 1 per every 100,000 cell divisions. So, other evolutionary processes are usually more important, more powerful agents of change in allele frequency. However, mutation is important because it is the ultimate source of genetic variation that makes evolution possible. It's the raw material behind all changes in allele frequency. Next up, number 2, we got gene flow, which is a very powerful agent of change. Gene flow is any movement of alleles from one population to another population. It can happen in a variety of ways. Animals can physically move from one population to another population. Gametes, or larval stages of organisms, can drift from one area to another area. So examples here would be the pollen of plants moving from plant to plant via animal pollinators or even wind. Animal dispersers that eat seeds and then take them far and wide. Finally, it can encompass mating of individuals from adjacent populations. In general, gene flow works to homogenize allele frequencies between populations, make them more similar, even them out. Number 3, we got non-random mating. So there's some kind of pattern to how individuals choose their mates. Individuals with certain genotypes are going to mate with one another more commonly than would be expected on a purely random basis. This can take the form of assortative mating or disassortative mating. In assortative mating, phenotypically similar individuals mate with each other, which increases the proportion of homozygous individuals. This happens in a lot of different species. For example, in eastern bluebirds, bright birds mate with other bright birds, dull birds mate with other dull birds. It even happens in humans, where humans will actively seek out partners that are the same, about the same height as them, that have the same years of education. This can be beneficial if the trait is beneficial. For example, if individuals are sorting due to body size, and body size is large body size is beneficial. But the downside is that assortative mating can lead to inbreeding. Relatives resemble each other, so relatives might end up mating. It's actually the most common form of inbreeding. Non-random mating can also be disassortative mating, where phenotypically different individuals mate with each other, thus producing an excess of heterozygotes. A good example of this is the MHC, or major histocompatibility complex. This is part of our immune system, and a lot of species will pick mates that have an alternate form of the MHC molecule. This is going to enhance the immunocompetence of the offspring. This is so beneficial that it happens in all sorts of animals, including fish, reptiles, birds, mammals like mice, primates, including humans. Number 4, we have genetic drift, which occurs in small populations. So this is a violation of that large population assumption. Genetic drift is when frequencies of alleles change drastically just due to chance. So this is random. It's a statistical accident. And because of this, frequencies will drift away from the original frequencies. Key here is that the alleles that end up becoming prevalent can be beneficial or harmful. It doesn't matter because it's just due to chance. Basically, if gametes of only a few individuals form the next generation, the alleles they carry will probably not be representative of the parent population. How powerful genetic drift is negatively related to population size, meaning that the smaller the population, the greater the random fluctuation and the greater the genetic drift. Genetic drift takes a couple of different forms. Founder effect is when one or a few individuals disperse and then become founders of a new isolated population that is far away from the original population and thus does not interbreed. Alleles then may be lost or rare. Rare alleles may become common. This is particularly common on islands, but it does occur in other situations like in humans whenever a new colony is founded from a parent colony. For example, the Amish in the United States were founded by just 200 Germans, and we can see that there's a lot of conditions, genetic conditions prevalent in the Amish population that are quite rare in the population at large, like polydactyly. The presence of more than 5 fingers. Another form of genetic drift is bottleneck effect, which is where a population of organisms is drastically reduced due to some kind of natural disaster like flooding, drought, disease, etc. In either case, organisms are not likely to carry all the alleles present in the parent population. This is particularly a problem for endangered species because even if populations can come back, the lack of variation makes them vulnerable to extinction. Genetic drift can lead to a loss of alleles in small, isolated populations. These alleles then become fixed. They're at either 0% or 100% of the population. Alleles that are rare in the first place are particularly vulnerable. There's a greater chance that the founders or that the individuals that remain after a bottleneck will not carry those alleles. So you can see that here we got the parent population. This red bead represents a very rare allele. If a bottleneck occurs and only a few individuals make it through that bottleneck, it's very likely that that rare allele will not be present in the surviving individuals. A good real-life example here is what happened to the northern elephant seal. It's called an elephant seal because it has a trunk-like nose. This is a good example of the bottleneck effect. These animals were nearly hunted to extinction at the beginning of the 19th century. We were down to just 20 individuals. These guys were a good source of blubber. One male provided about 25 gallons of oil, so they were hunted ruthlessly. Because of this extreme bottleneck, the species has lost almost all of its genetic variation, and there's been a lot of inbreeding, which has led to decreased immunity and an increased frequency of developmental diseases. Now, the population has rebounded. There is 127,000 elephant seals now. They increase by 6% a year. So this is a really robust number. However, that population number is misleading because of the lack of genetic diversity. It's uncertain whether they'll be able to survive further challenges like pollution, disease, or decrease in habitat. Finally, we come to selection. Right? Selection means that some individuals leave behind more progeny than others, and the rate at which they do this is affected by their phenotype and or behavior. This can occur either artificially or naturally. In artificial selection, breeders, human breeders, select for desired characteristics and breed those individuals that have those characteristics. And this is how we have all domesticated species. So pretty much every plant that we eat, one plant actually led to our cabbage, our broccoli, our cauliflower, our Brussels sprouts, and our collards, and our kale, right, due to artificial selection. We can see this in animals like dogs, too. In natural selection, it's the environment that determines which individuals in a population produce the most offspring. So in a sense, it's Mother Nature that is the breeder. For natural selection to occur, 3 conditions must be met. Number 1, variation has to exist among individuals in a population. If there's no variation, there's no trait that can be favored over another. Right? Number 2, variation has to exist among individuals that results in differences in the number of offspring that survive to the next generation. Something in the phenotype and behavior of these offspring makes them more successful. Finally, that variation must be genetically inherited so the offspring can carry these traits to the next generation. Selection is the most powerful agent of genetic change, but it is limited to the traits that are present. Now, a quick note here, these terms are often used interchangeably, but natural selection and evolution are not the same thing. Natural selection refers to the process, and it's only one of several processes that can result in evolution, right? We have genetic drift and non-random mating that can also result in evolution. And natural selection only results in evolution if the variation has a genetic basis that's present in offspring as well as parents. Evolution refers to the historical record or outcome of this change through time. The results of evolution driven by natural selection is that the population becomes better adapted or fit to their environment. It is the only agent that produces adaptive change.